Part three of today's show is going to focus on the spring position battles. And as you can see, there's four lines there, but there's really five position battles that are going to happen. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of these that are going to determine starting jobs and rotations and things like that. But I'm going to tell you, this may be me being biased as a former quarterback. This may be, I don't know where this comes from, but just as I'm putting these thoughts together for what this is going to be this spring, I just couldn't help but think that the spring battle that I am most intrigued by going into this spring is the battle of the second quarterback. And look, as I've said to you before, prepare yourself to hear whether it's Mike Denbrock or Marcus Freeman or Gino Gaduli. We're going to hear things about, Steve Angeli and CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie battling for this job. Probably got to prove himself. And there's some truth to that. But folks, look, Riley Leonard's going to be starting quarterback. There's no conversation about that, barring him getting injured. The question is, who positions themselves to be that number two guy? Who positions himself to say, hey, I'm going to be the number two. I'm going to be the backup. So if something happens to Riley, I'm that dude. That matters because if Riley Leonard does get hurt, that guy's going to be important. And also the winner of that battle is going to head into next year's spring in pole position to win the starting job. So this battle is going to be very, very important. And who takes over that job is going to be very, very important. I mean, we're going to see Steve Angeli is going to come in skyrocketing confidence. He's going to think this job is mine, and he's going to battle and act as if it's his job. And I mean that as a compliment, right? I mean, I don't want Steve looking over his shoulder. I want Steve looking forward. I want Steve saying, hey, what can I do to be the best player I can be? That's how you truly handle a position battle. You don't look at what's this other guy doing. The more you can get away from that, the better you're going to be. So for Steve, he shouldn't care if CJ Carr has a great day or Kenny Minchie has a great day or a great rep. Doesn't matter. I got to be the best version of myself. That if you're a quarterback and you're not more driven by who you are and what you're trying to accomplish as you are by what's around you, then you're not a great quarterback. And so for Steve, it's going to be about, I know who I am. I know where I got to get better. And I've got to go out there and perform on a daily basis and hold off. I mean, you are trying to hold off those younger players, but you're doing it by growing to be the best version of yourself. And for Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr, it's going to be about, hey, I don't care what Steve did last year. I don't care what Riley did. I'm going out there because I want to play and I want to compete. And so Kenny and CJ are not really in a learning position right now. They're going to learn. There's a lot they need to learn, but they need to look at this spring as a battle, especially for Kenny, because Kenny is in a very unique position where he's got to look ahead at Steve and Riley, but he's also going to have to be mindful of what's behind. And so while I just said, I'm what I'm talking about is don't focus on what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but understand that they're there, and that them being there means I've got to bring it every single day. And the danger for a guy like Kenny and guys like CJ is if you just kind of go out there and say, hey, I'm not going to be the starter. I'm just here to kind of learn. My time is going to be next year. You're going to find yourself getting passed up by all the other players. And then now you go into next year's spring and you're now the number 3 guy, and you're going to have Deuce Knight showing up. That's not really where you want to be. So this is an important spring, and this backup quarterback job is going to be a very important battle, not just for who steps in to lead this team if Riley Leonard goes down, but who's the guy that's going to start to show himself as, no, I'm the future of this football team. And I am all about it. I am very much looking forward to seeing that shake out this spring. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr go at it every single day. And if they all compete like I think they're going to, and if they all battle the way I think they're going to, it's going to make for a lot of fun this spring watching those kids. Steve's going to have great days, and then Kenny's going to have some great days, and then CJ's going to have some great days, and there's going to be some days they all play really well. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Offensive line is another interesting one. Obviously, right tackle is the most obvious. Tosh Baker won that job for the bowl game over Emil Wagner, but it starts all over again this offseason. Tosh may begin the spring as the number 1 at right tackle. I mean, I don't know. We'll find out. I would assume so. We don't know that for sure. Who knows what guys have been doing during winter workouts along those lines. But we kind of have an idea of who the contestants are for sure, of the veterans. You're going to have Tosh Baker, Emil Wagner are going to compete, but I fully expect Sullivan Absher to be given a chance this spring as well. Now, he could potentially be playing left tackle behind Charles Jagasaw, but it's still a competition, because if Sullivan's playing really well at left tackle and you're going to say, hey, listen, this kid's doing really well, let's give him a chance to go compete at right tackle and battle for that job. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that shapes up. Here's what the hope is for Notre Dame. Your hope is twofold. Number one, your hope is that the competition kind of brings the best out of everyone, and that so at least one guy, if not two, kind of step up and say, hey, I can handle this job and play at a high level. Somebody's going to start at right tackle. I mean, there's no way you go into the season without a right tackle. Are you in a situation where your starter is just the best of the group? Meaning, because listen, you can have three bad players and somebody's going to be the best of that three. That's not what you want. What you want is somebody says, hey, this is mine. I'm going to seize it. I'm going to play at a high level. I'm going to live up to the standard of an offensive lineman in Notre Dame every single day, with how I compete, how I work, how I execute, how I step, how I use my hands, how I finish. All of it is going to be at a high level, and this job is mine. That's what you want to see. The ideal is that multiple guys do that, and you say, hey, look, the battle's still going to rage going into the fall, but no matter who wins it, you're going to be pretty good there. That's the ideal situation that Notre Dame is going to have next year, or hopes to have next year at right tackle, and that's going to start this spring. So I'm very curious who's going to win that job. Interior offensive line's an interesting one, because obviously Rocco Spindler, I highly doubt Rocco is going to be available this spring. I don't know this for a fact. This is 100% my opinion. My understanding is he tore his ACL in November against Clemson. The odds of him being healthy enough at 320 pounds 5 months later, I would imagine is just not going to happen. Now, if the injury wasn't as severe as I think, or maybe he's out there, but my expectation is that Rocco's not going to be out there, which is why I'm really not going to talk a lot about Rocco, because this is a spring conversation. So don't think that I'm dismissing Rocco's chances this spring or for the starting job in the fall. I'm simply saying, so I'm just setting this caveat. I'm simply saying I'm not going to be spending any time after this talking about Rocco, because I don't expect Rocco to be out there as he comes back from the injury. And I'll have the same conversation at tight end. So when you look at the interior offensive line, it's easy to know who the first group is going to be most likely when you get out here. It's going to be, Pat Coogan at left guard most likely. It's going to be Ashton Craig at center, and then Billy Shrout at right guard, based on how the season ended. Now, they may say, hey, listen, I want to get Billy next to Charles. I want to get Coogan to the right. I mean, who knows? There's a lot of different things they can look into. New system, new offense, new run game. So there could be some things that change how they flip them around. But the moral of the story is that's going to expect to be the three interior guys. Is that just it? Is Joe Rudolph going to say, hey, these are my starters, we're going to battle with these guys? Or is he going to let there be a competition? Is he going to let does Ty Chan step up this offseason and push anybody? Does Sam Pendleton get an opportunity? Because listen, there's this thing that some fans like to say, well, hey, if this guy was good enough, he would have proved it in practice. As someone who's coached and played college football, as someone who's been in those battles as a player, and someone who's been in charge of those battles as a coach, and seen what's happened in other positions, that's one of the biggest lies in sports. You can't win a job that you're not given an opportunity to win a job with. I mean, I've been there as a player. I've seen it where this guy outplayed that guy, but the coaches kind of already decided who they wanted out there. And so no matter what happened, they would always find ways to go with the guy that they wanted. So you can say all you want, there's a battle, but if you as a coach have kind of set a standard for a younger player where he's got to play at a higher level than the veteran, or he's got to be more consistent than the veteran. I've seen this before at Notre Dame, other places, where the veteran will make mistakes in the spring. The young guy makes mistakes in the spring, and the coaches are harder on the younger, unproven guy. Why? Because there's a level of confidence in the veteran that, what he can do. But also it's like, I want the veteran, so I'm just going to be overly critical of the younger player and get the result that I want. That happens all the time in sports. That's why I say, well, if this guy was really the best player, he would be starting. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It really comes down to will they be allowed to compete? And if so, who steps up? Now, this doesn't mean that I'm can't wait for Pat Coogan to get beat out. And if there's a real competition, Pat Coogan's going to get beat out. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if there's a real competition on the interior of the offensive line, and Pat Coogan or Billy Schrouth or Ashton Craig or whoever starts, you know that they earned that job and they competed at a high level and they played at a high level. Because if Pat Coogan has to battle for the left guard job, for example, and it's a genuine competition and a genuine battle, and the other players at the position are allowed to fully compete. This includes Ashton or Joe Otting at center. Because if Joe Otting plays at a high level and he's one of your 5 best, you can move him to guard, or you can move Ashton Craig to guard and put Joe at center. So it's Sam Pendleton, it's Ty Chan, it's Peter Jones as a true freshman, it's Anthony Knapp as a true freshman, it's Sam Pendleton, who I'm very high on, and it could potentially even be Sullivan Absher. Again, if Sullivan Absher is like, dude, this is one of our 5th best guys, but so's Jagasol, so's Tosh Baker or Emil, then maybe Sullivan goes inside to guard. So the point is, if there's a genuine competition, and at the end of that genuine competition, Pat Coogan has earned that job, then we can all kind of look back and say, okay, Pat's raised his level of play. Pat's going to be better this year than he was last year. He earned it. This offensive line is going to be pretty good. If guys are handed jobs, then you don't have that same level of confidence. So that's why this interior battle is going to be so important. You want younger players to step up and compete and push and make the veterans better. But in order to do that, you've got to be given a legitimate opportunity to do that and prove that. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing if that happens this spring and what steps Joe Rudolph takes to create competition this spring. Look, there is nobody on this offensive line that is proven enough as a college player to have just a job handed to him. Not Jagasol, not Baker, not Coogan, not Craig, not Schrouth, not Wagner, not Pendleton, not Otting, not Chan, not Absher. Nobody has played enough or played well enough to say, yep, you're the guy. Quentin Nelson was going to be that guy in 16 and 17. Mike McGlinchey was going to be that guy in 16 and 17. There have been guys that are like, look, that's our guy, right? But none of these guys have proven that. None of these guys have played enough or have, even from a talent standpoint, Charles Jagasol is the most talented tackle they have, but is his talent so great that no matter what he does, he's going to start over Sullivan Absher or Emil Wagner or Tosh Baker? I don't think that's the case. He's going to have to earn it. And if they're allowed to do that, then I think this offensive line is going to end up being pretty good. And we're going to start to see glimpses of that this spring, because the nice thing about it is with the D-line they got to go against every day, there's no days off. Because not only competing with the guys around you and to prove yourself, you're having to compete in one-on-ones every day against a group of defensive linemen that were part of one of the best defenses in all of college football last year. So that's going to be a fun aspect of this spring battle as well. The third battle is a running back. This one's a little bit different because unlike quarterback and offensive line, where for the most part you find your starters, those guys win those jobs, and they're the ones to play. If not all the snaps, the majority of the snaps. The next two are more so, it's kind of twofold. Who starts, but then also who is in the rotation. So the running back battle is going to be interesting. And honestly, for me, it's not about Jeremiah Love versus Jadarian Price. They're both going to play. I don't care who's the first back out. And I would imagine that's going to change from game to game depending on what the script is early and what they're trying to accomplish and who fits those type of things. They're both going to play a ton. They're both going to be very important parts of this offense. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do. Yes, they're going to have to compete and step up and play well and all that, but I fully expect them to do that. The more interesting battle is going to be is with those two, and then what's behind it. And here's what I mean by that. When I talk about those two, they're both going to play. They're both going to make a lot of plays. But here's the question: is it one guy is 1 and the other guy is 2, and they're clearly 1-2? So one guy's going to get 65% of the touches. The other guy gets 30%, and then everybody else gets 5. Or is it 1A, 1B, where it's closer to a somewhat even splits in touches, and then sometimes you just ride the hot hand late in the game? So that's to be determined between Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Does one guy kind of emerge as the best by far of that group? Or is it, wow, we've got two really good players? That's partly about guys stepping up, but it's also about guys not taking a step back also. It's not always that a guy emerges in that role where it's like he was just too good. Sometimes a guy has a bad spring or a bad summer, gets injured, and he fades back. You hope that it's not the case. But that's part one of the running back jump. The part two, however, which is more interesting, is going to be how does the depth chart shake out behind him? Now, Mike Denbrock used a lot of different running backs at LSU last year, so it wouldn't necessarily be a surprise to see him do that a lot at Notre Dame, especially since that's something that Dylan McCullough has talked about him wanting to do. You know, Logan Diggs had 119 carries last year. Josh Williams had 55. Noah Cain had 37. Caleb Jackson had 31. John Emery had 23. So you had five different running backs that carried the ball at least 20 times last year. And you looked at how they were used. They were all used somewhat differently. Obviously, Logan Diggs was kind of the number one guy, but you'd see other running backs. Josh Williams got used more in the pass game. You'd see other different aspects of how those backs were used. Obviously, Notre Dame liked to do that last with D. McCullough. So do we see a similar situation this year? And then who establishes himself as that guy's got to play? Is it just Jabron and then everybody else? Does Devin Ford step up in year two and push a little bit more for more of a role? And then what about the freshmen? You know, what about Kedron Young? What about Aeneas Williams? Do they come in here this spring because they're both going to be in early enrollees and say, "Hey, look, I'm here to play. I'm not here to sit for a year. So you better watch out because I'm going to come in here and battle." And so you know, if Jabron Payne and Jeremiah Love, if Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love are kind of like 1-2 or 1A 1B in some capacity, who's number three? Is it still going to be Jabron? Does somebody push Jabron? Can Jabron play well enough to maybe, even if he's still three, to take more of the touches away from 1 and 2? That's going to be interesting. Can Devin Ford push for a bigger role? Can one of the freshmen push for a bigger role? I'm excited to see all of it because and people talk about iron sharpens iron. I don't know if there's a position group on this roster where you can look at the number one guy and then the bottom guy and say, dude, all those guys can ball. Like we can win with all those guys could go for a grand next year. I think the only guy that I would look at and say he's probably not a 1,000-yard rusher is Devin Ford. He's more of a do it all kind of guy. But if Jabron Payne is Notre Dame's starting running back and he's the bell cow this year, he's going to run for 1,000 yards. Same of Jadarian Price. Same of Jeremiah Love, who we know. But Kedron Young could be that kind of guy. Aeneas Williams could be that kind of guy. This is an absolutely loaded backfield. It's young. It's unproven. There's a lot they have to show this year. Yes, they're talented, but can they do the simple things? Can they make sure that their tracks are very good every time on their run lanes? Can they do little things like getting the ball in the right arm when they take a handoff? You know, can they show the proper patience needed to maximize the blocking that's there? There's all these little things that go into it. You know, like something simple like if I'll give you an example from my coaching career. We ran inside zone a ton. We ran a real downhill inside zone. We ran it from under center. And the footwork was open, cross, plant, go. And the reason it was that way is because it was a timing mechanism. So if you just open, cross, and go, and you're just that one step, you may get to the hole too soon. And the hole doesn't, the inside zone, the cutback lane doesn't open up in time. You got there too soon. Or if you open up, cross, plant, or maybe you take too short of an open step, you take too wide of an open step, it gets you off the proper track. You're not on the A gap. You're now kind of like B gap on your initial track. If you take that extra step, now you may get downhill and the hole has opened and closed by the time you get down there. That's why those little things are important. And that's why I was taught, hey, look, your job is to make sure that the footwork and the timing of the running backs is correct and they're attacking the proper aiming points. Once they get the ball and you make them do that, then the rest of it's just them being athletes. And so those young players have a lot to prove in that regard. Who steps up and pass pro this year? That's going to be an interesting thing. They're going to need that. Who's going to step up and say, hey, look, coach, you've got to find more ways to get me the ball. I am too good to not get the ball more. That's something that's got to be earned. It's not like, hey, we're just going to go do this and give everybody up. No, running backs have to prove to the coaches, you need to get me the football more in the pass game. And will they do that? And so what's the hierarchy going to look like at running back? I'm fascinated by that and looking forward to that. And then the same is true in the last position battle. And that's at receiver. Again, A lot of guys are going to play. Who starts? Okay, that matters. But is it a thing where, yeah, you start, but reps are shared? You may start, but you play less than the guy behind you. You may start, but you only play in this certain personnel package. Or is it a situation where you start and you dominate the reps? Who's going to start at X? Who's going to start at boundary? Who's going, that's what the X is. Who's going to start at Z, the outside position? Who's going to be your slots? Does Jaden Thomas just play the boundary or does he move around? Does Jaden Greathouse just play the slot or does he move around? There's going to be so many interesting questions that we have about receiver, about who's going to start, who's going to be part of the rotation. And I'm interested to see this one, like the running back one is fascinating, but this one might be the most important because you're gonna need some. The difference now in past springs is you didn't have, like last year they had some freshmen that showed up, but they were freshmen, they were way behind. You had Caleb Smith showed up, but he was only there for like half the spring and then he quit. All these type of things were going on. You had some injuries, but it was a lot of, okay, Jaden Thomas and Dion are kind of the veterans. We know they're going to play, but we don't know what else is out there. Now you've got two transfers. Bo Collins will not be part of this conversation because he's not here in the spring, but you've got Chris Mitchell, you've got Jaden Harrison, plus you have two early enrollees who are very talented players, and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. So you've now got four newcomers that are going to be able to push a little bit more than last year's freshman group because it was only freshmen. And then a transfer who just, with all due respect, isn't on the same level as Chris Mitchell and quit halfway through the spring. And then now you've got, Deion Colsey. It's now or never time for Deion Colsey. Jaden Thomas, he's got to assert himself. We've been hearing in the last 2 years, Jaden Thomas is our best receiver. Jaden Thomas is our best receiver. Okay, fine. Jaden has shown some flashes of that. He's certainly your most steady receiver. But can Jaden really go out there and take his game to another level or not? Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. The answer to that's going to tell us a lot about this offense. Chris Mitchell, very dynamic player at Florida International, guy that claims to have 4.3 speed, and that all sounds good. And we've heard some things about his speed and what it looks like and how impactful it can be, and that all sounds great. But can he do it at Notre Dame when he did at Florida International? I don't know. We're going to find that out. And he's gonna be pushed in a way that he's never been pushed before, because at Florida International, with all due respect, he wasn't battling against Jaden Greathouse and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert, Jaden Thomas and Jordan Faison and KK Smith and Jaden Harrison and guys like that for playing time. So he's going to have to raise his level of play much, much greater degree on a daily basis, which if he handles it well, I think that he will, it's going to make him a way better player than he was even at Florida International. That doesn't necessarily mean his production is going to be as good, but maybe it does. We'll see. So I'm excited to see how this group shakes out, but there's just so many question marks about, how often is Jordan Faison going to be at practice? If he's not there all the time, does that open up an opportunity for someone else to step into that role? I mean, I know Jordan Faison's like the hot name now because he finished the year well. He's playing lacrosse, but let's not forget, before he got moved away from the slot, Jaden Greathouse was the dude early in the season that performed at a high level. You want to find ways to use both of those guys, but is it as a rotation at one spot? Or does Jaden Greathouse say, hey, look, you can play me anywhere, coach. I'll play boundary, I'll play field, I'll play slot, do whatever. Is the receiving core so good that maybe at times you use some 10 personnel? That's a good question. That's only going to happen, though, is if guys force that issue. And so how these battles shake out, who plays where, how often, what's the rotation, man, all this stuff is going to be fun to find out this spring. And that's what I've got my eye on from a position battle standpoint. A lot of position battles raging. Position battles aren't always for starting jobs, as you guys are seeing. This part's going to be fun, but how these battles are waged, and it's not about who wins them, but why. Why did that guy win the job? Not that he did win the job, but why. That's going to tell us so much about how good this team is. Look, somebody's going to win the job, but did he win it by default? Did he win it because of all the guys that didn't play well? He was the best. Did a guy just seize it? Was it a great battle between two guys and one guy just had to really raise his game to another level? All those things are great questions. And we're going to find out those answers this spring. But if they get if the battles are happening in that way, this team is going to be very, very good. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of these battles rage throughout the spring. We're going to move on to part 4. We're going to rank the position groups last. Before we do that, folks, do me a solid. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, tell your friends. We don't do any advertising. We expect you, our listeners, our community. Tell your Notre Dame friends about us, what we bring, why they're missing out if they're not tuned in to Irish Breakdown. You can tell them about our website at irishbreakdown.com. You can tell them about our premium message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com.